The purpose of this video is to discuss why the red pill isn't generally effective for incels, but also present a case for why it shouldn't be tossed out the window despite its abundance of problems. Like I said in a previous video, the red pill is primarily about non-shallow behavioral determinism, the idea that achievable social skills and status are the predominant determiners of outcome. This philosophy seems to be characterized by a tension between personal achievement and sexual desirability. While a noticeable degree of independence, not necessarily orthogonality, exists between the two in modern society, believers in the red pill push for their conflation universally, revealing of an underlying spectrum of delusion. In some sense, the modern red pill is all about tension. Old versus new, male versus female, reclusion versus competition, failure versus dignity, control versus fate, societal value versus sexual value. Rather than the advertised philosophy about truth behind society, I think it's become more like the point where traditionally functional structures run face first into the wall of modern liberalized desires. And in this sense, unlike the blue pill, the red pill carries both religious and political baggage. When looking at the core principle of the red pill, it's pretty easy to see who it's useful for. Individuals who have desirable genetics but haven't realized their potential sufficiently to signal desirability to the people they find desirable. With this understanding, it's also easy to see why the red pill isn't generally effective for incels struggling with deeper problems, a group that lacks the potential to be reasonably desirable to those they find desirable. It doesn't matter how much potential incels realize, they're unable to meet the basic standard of those they wish to pursue. In Before Misunderstanding, I'm aware there's subtlety here to address. First, who an incel pursues can strongly determine whether or not they are an incel. A common problem with the involuntary part of inceldom is pursuing partners with standards they can't fulfill. Even Chad can be an incel if he's only sexually attracted to aliens from another galaxy. Hypergamy plays a non-trivial role as well, but as with most things, I'm inclined to guess neither extreme represents the truth. Rather, people in general fall somewhere in the middle. In expectation, incels, especially gammas with overinflated self-worth, likely pursue somewhat unrealistic goals. Simultaneously, hypergamy has probably made it so potentially realistic partners are noticeably below an incel's relative value in the sexual desirability hierarchy. And second, people tend to be very bad at making objective judgments about potential. Let's consider this example as a case study.
Yes, it's true. Tyrone Magnus was once an incel. The most basic form of it, though.
Sure, he could have fit the definition of being involuntarily celibate if he could not find a partner for an extended period of time. But if his sexual preferences haven't changed since when he was unable to find a partner, it's disingenuous for him to call himself an incel specifically because he had the potential to have his desire reciprocated and was only failing due to not realizing achievable attributes. Admittedly, to some extent, I also fall into this category. To contrast, if you're a short male with an ectomorphic frame and relatively unattractive face, the effect of maximizing your Olympic lifts, having a successful six-figure career, and winning awards for your hobbies may only have minimal effect on your desirability towards many women taller than you, purely due to the prioritization of genetic features with visual signals for offspring when your desirability is judged. This is why universality fails for the red pill. Similar to advocacy of the blue pill, the problem is rooted in inaccurate imagination of representatives. The difference is, individuals that push general adoption of the red pill tend to use themselves as the representative, believing their own struggles to be broadly relatable to those experiencing failure, and as a result deducing the solutions they found to similarly be widely applicable. I don't mean to trivialize the struggles of these individuals, but this way of thinking is highly susceptible to problems like survivorship bias and observer bias, so I'd encourage consumers of red pill content to actively evaluate the advice they internalize. That being said, while some red pill content creators are clearly involved in the topic for money or clout, I want to believe some are genuinely trying to help, so I'd encourage incels to at least be considerate in their refutation. All this being said, what are the actual problems with modern red pill philosophy? I think the answer to this question can be summarized as false hope and its consequences. There's sort of a misdirection that happens. The red pill sells itself as medicine for the lies of society, creating resentment towards the blue pill while making empty promises itself to grow believership. When these delusions unavoidably collide with reality, the red pill has already established the groundwork to redirect blame towards society as the source of betrayed trust, creating an unhealthy feedback loop that intensifies deep-seated anger, resulting in carelessly formulated and often alarming opinions. While not as fundamental as bloated self-worth from believing in the blue pill, the majority of stereotypical undesirable traits like misogyny and sexism commonly associated with incels result from the manifestation of these opinions. But what exactly are these empty promises? In line with the core principle of the red pill, they primarily involve promises of efficacy following the development or achievement of certain skills or status. I'll touch on a few of the more popular in this video and present thoughts that can hopefully prime a reasonable mindset in those intending to research further. Just because a hypothesis explains a set of observations does not mean it's sensible, especially when evidence is lacking or justification is questionable. The first on this list is pickup arts, or PUA. It's the idea that a set of purely social skills exists for courting partners. It's easy to see that PUA is ineffective for incels because a significant barrier to romantic relationships is not social. Further, there's a lot of evidence suggesting social skills are heavily influenced by genetics involving attractiveness, so even if the barrier was purely social, incels would still likely find PUA unproductive towards their pursuit of a partner. On top of that, there's tons of red flags. Programs teaching PUA are often expensive, and falsifying evidence is regularly deflected to improper technique or lack of training. PUA is essentially a sub-skill of sales where the product is yourself. Even if the product is valuable and the salesperson is attractive and adept, most people hate being solicited, especially with the approach scenarios taught by red-pilled instructors.
Sorry, excuse me. May I just tell you something really quickly?
Yeah, I don't want to be in a video.
Further, I think the context for PUA doesn't really work for incels. PUA primarily leverages people's wants, but relationships are closer to a need. Even if you have traits that make you a successful PUA, I'm hesitant to believe the results versus effort trade-off is healthy for incels. My more confident acquaintances have boasted they could sell sunglasses to blind people with their skill. As a person who has some experience in sales, I'd ask people with a similarly enthusiastic mindset to try selling a Honda Accord to someone in the market for a Lamborghini. Instead of social skills, PUA tends to manifest behaviors like this.
Can I get an image of your butt?
No.
No? Okay. Bye.
Learning to become comfortable with yourself is important, but there are better ways to do this. The resultant behavior of PUA usually just seems socially destructive, and I believe when the novelty of the contrarian behavior wears off, incels will look back on their PUA days in contempt. Second on the list is mewing. I've discussed this topic in a previous video, so please check it out if you want to hear my thoughts. The primary result is thematically consistent with the red pill giving questionable hope. Third is that a return to traditional values will help lonely men. This aspect of red pill philosophy is where most of the negative stigma comes from. Whether it's phrased as encouraging youth to be more responsible or giving everything up to Jesus, the goal is to create scarcity of opportunity, like what I discussed in my blue pill video, to engage with potential partners through devices like strict monogamy, forcing women to stay home without internet so they can't meet more men, or reverting women's emancipation so they're financially dependent on men. As for why I think pushing traditional values qualifies as an empty promise, many of these going back in time scenarios are extremely unlikely due to how unreasonable they are. Reverting women's equality of opportunity would likely cripple the labor supply of a number of industries. I'm also uncertain what effect this would have on consumption as a whole, but I don't think we want to risk rewinding the economy to placate sexual frustration. Ironically, it's similar in flavor to the short-sightedness displayed by extremists on the left of prioritizing problem locality without scaled consideration, despite primarily being desired by extremists on the right. The other problem is, while at an individual level, traditional values can be adopted overnight, without laws, circumstances, or culture to maintain communal adherence to these virtues, nothing really changes. In this sense, while it's an individual blue pill, it's a societal red pill involving a long-term change in the state of how we socialize. I'd further like to interject a personal thought. I think traditional values were designed how they were because there was a trade-off in power and responsibility. As modernization makes opportunities safer to pursue, reducing responsibility in general, it should be expected society will adjust itself with an accompanying drop in power for those who hold it. Unless complainers really want to go back to commonly risking their lives at work, I don't think rashly pushing traditional values will be a solution to inceldom, even though I personally enforce some of these values on myself. And while we can argue the current structure was built by the blood, sweat, and tears of men, I believe taking responsibility means not taking credit for things you weren't personally involved in accomplishing and not deferring responsibility to that collective's history. From this perspective, we can see why the one-sided criticism of women being opportunistic in incel communities feels hypocritical. Sure, a non-trivial subset of women are entitled and opportunistic, but same with men. All people are opportunistic. This is how we're built and how the game works, and I think people will have a much better time playing by embracing this idea rather than trying to break it. I'm hoping to give some less abstract thoughts on this point in a future video, but for now, let's move on. Fourth is MGTOW, or men going their own way. Basically, you can't fire me, I quit, followed by achieving a lifestyle state of high independence. It includes shades of stoicism and something they call being a sigma male, which I'm having trouble distinguishing from gammas. This empty promise has formed its own subsidiary community, and at least regarding inceldom, is highlighted on the extreme end by a belief that the primary societal purpose for women is sexual relief for men and reproduction. I think many adopters use this idea like how you would use shallow reverse psychology. Unfortunately for most of these people, it seems to end up just as a deep-seated delusion, since most people don't inherently want to be alone, and no matter how much you polish feces, it will still be feces. Signaling seclusion doesn't matter if no one cared in the first place. There's a thin line between men going their own way and men sent their own way. If you're sexually undesirable, the market doesn't care whether or not you're leaving. Looking at MGTOW from a less emotional angle, the tension basically exists between competition while risking failure and reclusion while maintaining dignity. My guess is the original mindset was formulated around advising men to remember their dignity while chasing relationship opportunities to maximize potential for success while minimizing risk. I think this is wise advice, to not give in to psychological and behavioral inclinations born from desperation, and putting effort into solving your own problems while remaining reasonably stoic, so your dignity is protected while risking failure. But the movement has since grown into something seemingly quite strange. Perhaps individuals that experienced too much failure started giving unjustified advice and gained substantial followings, or power got to the heads of community leaders, leading to a loss of reasonableness. Regardless, it seems MGTOW is minimally effective for solving the basic incel problem, since no matter how much control you gain from becoming independent, relationships involve other people, and only so much can be done without addressing the influence of predetermined factors like genetics on interaction. Bringing things full circle to the start of this video, last on the list is the promise that societal value implies sexual value. That societally valued achievements or skills like financial success and adept small talk implies sexual desirability. Societal value does not necessarily imply sexual value. There is independence because society evolves and changes much faster than genetics. I'm not even confident skill or status differences are fully perceivable by people without sufficient specialized expertise. Things that you have pride in or find attractive about yourself may just be lumped into some broad category for good enough in most observers. This point leads deeper into why I think incel communities have an incomplete comprehension of hypergamy, but that's a bit off topic, so I might come back to it in another video. In Before Misunderstanding, I'm not saying societal and sexual value are orthogonal. However, especially with regards to most people who struggle deeply with inceldom, the reality is what people find sexually desirable is primarily a genetic concept. If you need convincing, you can search for research about dominant factors in determining attraction or universal standards in beauty. Referring back to perceivability, we can think of judging physical attractiveness as a field of study where almost all people have highly developed expertise due to evolution. Anyways, I don't want to reinvent the wheel here, so I'll defer to others like Kova's School of Instagram or FACEandLMS for making this point. In converse, what people find socially desirable is a combination of things like economics, culture, and, well, sexual desirability. And now we can see why many incels who spend thousands on PUA courses, hours championing men's rights, and hemispheres of focus trying to be stoic still end up at the end of the day lonely and miserable. When it comes to applicability to incels, the philosophy is fundamentally based on an error in logic. A implies B does not mean B implies A. Sexual desirability implies social desirability to a rather significant extent, likely across cultures and time, but that does not mean, and I don't think it's the case, that social desirability implies sexual desirability to a remotely comparable extent for incels, especially not in today's society. Incorrectly framing this concept and misleading expectations creates deep, unhealthy delusions that take advantage of many individuals' desires to feel inherently important, superior, and in control to sustain itself as a world-building philosophy in the minds of believers. The modern red pill has become, in many ways, just a mental parasite. So with all this criticism, why does the title only say mostly ineffective? Aside from the incels with desirable but unrealized potential I mentioned earlier, we can take a step back and look at the red pill from a perspective outside of pursuing a partner. In this context, the red pill is simply about qualitative self-improvement, rather than an unhealthy way to cope with sexual frustration. Red pill advice no longer serves the sole purpose of pursuing a partner, and thus loses the trait that makes it fuel for delusion. instead becoming potentially helpful for improving quality of life. Understanding the value of your own dignity and what actually makes you happy can help with avoiding toxic relationships formed in desperation, potentially saving you from unnecessary financial burdens in the future. And rather than PUA for the sake of approaching strangers with the intention to enter a sexual relationship, working on social skills can make day-to-day interactions smoother. For example, this individual can improve how he communicates by working on what appears to be a habit involving smacking his lips.
But interesting.
In summary, regardless if people like this have good intentions,
accept what you can't change and work on everything else that you can change.
or just want to sell you a product,
I recommend you get my product, Becoming a God. It's an A to Z on how to change yourself.
we should evaluate both what we can do and what the difficulties are when determining our perspective on a problem. The red pill only covers one half, focusing almost entirely on what individuals should do with little focus on properly evaluating underlying issues. I don't blame people who just want to help and genuinely give red-pilled advice. Logic is hard, even experienced thinkers can confuse directional implication, but I hope people will avoid spreading and internalizing false hope because it can be extremely damaging to people who are struggling. Thanks for listening, and I hope to see you in the next one.